Welcome once again, engineering students. My name is Mr. C. Tobejane from Ehlanzeni TVET College, Mlumati campus. Today, we are still continuing with our lesson, but we are looking at lesson 2 for engineering science and 3 under frictional force. Now, just a small recap of what we did on our previous session. We looked at an object which was placed on a horizontal surface. Now, we said that each and every object placed on a horizontal surface, that object is experiencing 4 external forces, namely the applied force, which is Fa. We said it's given by Fa is equal to ma, m being the mass, a being the horizontal acceleration. We also had our frictional force. The frictional force, we said that is the force which opposes the motion of this particular object. Now, under normal circumstances, when an object is expected to move, or rather to slide, it means that the frictional force should be less than the applied force. We have the weight, which is calculated by mg, m being the mass of that particular object, and g being a constant value of the gravitational acceleration acting vertically downwards, which is 9.8 meters per second squared, as well as our normal reaction. We also understood, as I've explained, that friction occurs only on 2 surfaces. When these 2 surfaces are in contact and then there is movement, now friction will tend to oppose the movement of these surfaces. That is called force of friction, or rather friction in simple terms. We also again looked at the uses of friction, or rather the advantages of friction. We said that it is important to have friction, more particularly in our daily lives, because there are other things that needs friction for them to operate. They were listed in our previous session. If maybe you missed that session, you can go to our websites and YouTube and our Twitter handle. You'll be able to find the link there, of which I will also speak about it at the end of this session. We also spoke about the laws of friction, that you must know what friction depends upon and what friction doesn't depend upon. Now, today we are going to be looking at friction on an inclined plane. Now, before an inclined plane, we said that this object has weight, which is mg. Please take note, it's very much important. We have friction. We have coefficient of friction. We have theta, which is the angle of friction or the angle of repose. We have the normal reaction, which is equal to the weight, which is equal to mg. We again have what? The applied force. Now, this is what happens under a normal circumstance. But in today's lesson, we are looking at friction on an inclined plane. Friction on an inclined plane. Now, what happens to an object when it's parked, or rather if height when it's parked on an inclined plane? That particular object will experience a certain number of forces. Such forces could be the force perpendicular to the inclined plane, the force parallel to the inclined plane, as well as the angle with which that particular inclined plane is projected apart. If you look at our screen there, we have the 2 scenarios. First, it is the horizontal, where they are showing you the mass and the normal reaction of that particular object. And then again, we have our inclined plane. You have your angle there, you have your force perpendicular to the inclined plane, you have your force parallel to the inclined plane, which I believe is better explained here. Now, before we can go into details, here's what's exactly happening there. We know that our weight, in any circumstance, your weight should always be vertically down. Why is your weight always vertically down? Because your weight is always affected by gravity, and gravity is always vertically downwards. So it means that our weight is vertically down. But in this case, the weight component perpendicular to the inclined plane the weight component perpendicular to the inclined plane. Why are we saying it's perpendicular to the inclined plane? Because this weight now should now be equal to the normal reaction. The weight component perpendicular to the inclined plane is given by W cos theta. That is the weight component perpendicular to the inclined plane because it makes an angle of 90 degrees with the inclined plane. Now, if you can remember here, this is what we had, the normal reaction, the weight. But if we now flip this around, obviously the weight will remain behind because it's always vertically down, which means that our normal reaction should now be equal to the weight component perpendicular to the inclined plane. And again, we also have the weight component parallel to the inclined plane. The weight component parallel to the inclined plane, that is the weight which forces this particular object to slide down. You see, we normally use that to calculate the minimum force required either to move the object up or to move the object down. So we have our weight component parallel to the inclined plane. This W is always mg. This is mg cos theta. This is mg sine what? Sine theta. Don't forget, weight component perpendicular to the inclined plane, W cos theta. Weight component parallel to the inclined plane, W sine theta. Now if you can look at our diagram here, it clearly indicates the minimum forces which are required to move the object either up or down. Now, we have the first one. First, it represents the minimum force required to move up the inclined plane, which is given by F up is equal to the frictional force plus W sine theta. Why are we saying plus W sine theta? It is because the force which is required to move up should be greater than the force parallel to the inclined plane. But when the object is required or is expected to slide down, the force perpendicular to parallel to the inclined plane is not really required to be greater than that force of this object to move down. Let us place our equations clearly so that you understand them. The equations that you need to expect here are, number one, you need to know how to calculate your frictional force. Your frictional force, this equation is always there. This equation is constant, whether with your object being on a horizontal surface or your object being on an inclined plane. This equation is always there. You must know it. We also have our equation theta is equal to tan inverse of mu, coefficient of friction. It's always there. This is a constant equation. You might have seen it on our previous session. It is always there. Even on an inclined plane, this equation will always be there. We have again the equation to calculate mu, or rather the coefficient of friction, which is given by your frictional force divided by your normal reaction. This equation is always there as well, either on an inclined plane or on a horizontal plane. Now, these are the equations that you must take note of. The additional equations now, when it comes to an inclined plane, are the force. That force parallel to the inclined plane is given by W cos theta, which is mg cos theta. That is the force perpendicular to the inclined plane. It is this equation, perpendicular to the inclined plane. And then the force parallel to the inclined plane is given by W sine theta or mg sine theta. That is the force which is parallel to the inclined plane. Now remember, friction is always there. Why is friction always there? It is because this object, or rather friction will always, whether the object is moving up or it's moving down, friction will always at all time oppose the motion. That is why we have it right at the top there. We have the force, the minimum force required to move the object up, which is given by the frictional force plus W sine theta, or rather plus FC, rather Fs I mean to say. This is the minimum force required to move the object up. I believe that is the equation that appears there. We also have the minimum force required to move the object where? Down. To move the object down. We need to understand these equations and we need to know them by heart. If you understand them, you know how to apply them, you know where to apply them, why to apply them, and how to apply them. It will simplify the basic concepts of engineering science when it comes to inclined plane. Now, let me do a quick recap on these formulas. I've listed them for you. We have the frictional force. We have the frictional force. In this case, the frictional force is the coefficient of friction multiplied by what? The normal reaction. But what is normal reaction? This is the equation which I didn't put here. The normal reaction on a horizontal plane. On a horizontal plane. On a horizontal plane, we said that normal reaction will be equal to the weight, which is equal to mg. That is normal reaction on a horizontal plane. But on an inclined plane now, your normal reaction will be equal to W cos theta. W cos theta, or rather mg cos what? Cos theta. That is your normal reaction. Now that is the difference where you need to locate it. Here's our formulas. I think I've written it down. We have your frictional force, which is coefficient of friction, multiplied by your normal reaction, but your normal reaction is equal to W cos theta, which means that your frictional force will be equal to coefficient of friction multiplied by W cos theta. Take note of that equation. The weight, we know how to calculate weight, is given by mg, mass and gravity. The minimum force required to move the object up the inclined plane is given by the frictional force plus W sine theta. The minimum force required to move the object down the inclined plane is given by frictional force minus W sine theta. And again, another equation appears that we are familiar with. We did it with the horizontal plane. Now, it also appears on the inclined plane. Theta is equal to tan inverse of coefficient of friction, or mu. The coefficient of friction, it's also the frictional force divided by the normal reaction. It appeared with our horizontal plane. It appears on our inclined plane. That force component perpendicular to the inclined plane, Fc. Now we put the C so that we can be able to separate the force components parallel to the inclined plane, the force component perpendicular to the inclined plane, where the C represents cos and the S represents sine. So we use that to separate the two. Fc is equal to W cos theta, Fs is equal to W sine theta. Know these equations. Most of these equations, they don't appear in a formula sheet during your exam. So you must know them. You must practice these equations so that you know where and how to apply them. Right. Let us see if we can apply them. Let us see if we can apply these equations in a scenario like this. Can we do that? Right. Let me erase this so that we can have enough space here. Yeah. Should hire a person to do this for me. Should hire a person to do this, right? The question says, a box of supplies with a mass of 80 kg rests on an inclined plane making an angle of 10 degrees with the horizontal. If the coefficient of friction between the box and the plane is 0.2, we have our data there. Can we extract? We're going to have our inclined plane. The moment they mention an angle of 10 degrees, angle of whatsoever, just construct your inclined plane. It makes things simple. We have your inclined plane. Is it inclining? Yes, it's inclining. It's inclining. It makes an angle of 10 degrees with the horizontal. This object is placed here. Now, what is it that we know about this object? Before we continue about everything, we need to put all our forces there. We have our weight, W, mg, we have our weight component perpendicular to the inclined plane, cos theta. I know them, I'm just listing them so that I won't have a problem when I start answering my questions in an exam. We have your normal reaction, I have my weight component parallel to the inclined plane. See? Now things are simple. Oh, as well as my coefficient of friction. Right, let us read the question again. A box of supplies with a mass of 80 kg. We have a mass of 80 kg. Rests on an inclined plane making an angle of 10 degrees. Already have our 10 degrees there. With the horizontal, if the coefficient of friction between the box and the plane is 0.2, this is our coefficient of friction here, 0.2. What is it that is expected from us? We're expected, number one, to calculate the component of the weight of the box parallel to the plane, component of the weight of the box perpendicular to the plane, the sliding friction, the force parallel to the plane to move the box up, force parallel to the plane that will move the box down. Do you still remember our equations? We can apply them. So each and every question that you encounter, either in an exam or during your practice time, you need to ensure that you understand your equations. You choose your equations well, you extract your data. Doing that will simply automatically be able to identify the equation that you need. Now the first question says, calculate the component of the weight of the box parallel to the plane. Which component of the weight of the box which is parallel to the plane? The equation that we need to use? Which equation? Parallel. Number 8, right? The last equation. That is the weight component of the box parallel to the plane. That is the equation that we need to use. F S is equal to W sine theta. Remember, we said parallel to the plane, sine. Perpendicular to the plane, cos. You must not forget that. Our weight is mg, which is going to be 80. Let me write that. Let me write mg sine theta, which is 89.8 sine what? What is our angle there? 10 degrees. 10 degrees. Have your calculator handy? In this case, I'm using my Casio, which gives me excellent results. So we have 80 times 9.8 sine 10 degrees. The answer is 136.14 Newton. That is my weight component parallel to the inclined plane. Got that? Right, cool. Let us move to the next one now. The component of the weight of the box perpendicular to the plane. Now, which equation should we use there? Exactly. Number 7. F C W cos theta, which is mg cos theta. Substitute our mass there, our gravity there, and then cos 10 degrees. If we punch that in our calculator, this should give us 772.09 Newton. Now be careful whenever you're using your calculator. Ensure that your calculator at all times is on degrees and not on radians. You can reset your calculator. You can check your calculator's manual how to reset your calculator so that you always get excellent results. More particularly when you are dealing with trig ratios, sine, cos, and tan. If your calculator is in radians, you might get the wrong answers. But if it's in degrees, well, everything is sorted. Moving right along, we are moving to the third question. Now they are looking for the sliding friction. What do they mean about the sliding friction? That is the frictional force that occurs in that particular box. Equation to use? The first one, right? The frictional force. The frictional force is given by coefficient of friction multiplied by normal reaction. But what is normal reaction now? What is normal reaction? Normal reaction is the value of the force component perpendicular to the what? To the inclined plane, right? So this is like saying coefficient of friction, mass, gravity, cos what? Theta. But because mass, gravity, and cos theta, I've already calculated that, so I could just simply substitute that there. So we have 0.2 multiplied by our value there, 772.09. 772.09. Here's my 772 multiplied by 0.2. This will give me 154.42 Newton. Simple, right? Just read the question, identify what you're given, go to your formulas, identify the correct formula to use, and then just use it. Simple like that. Now, the fourth one, the force parallel to the plane that will move the box up. This box now is required to move up, right? It's required to move up the plane. When the box is required to move up the plane, it means that that force should be greater than the frictional force. Because in this case, the frictional force will try to drag this object down. But we need that force that will move the object up. Equation to use? Which equation? I have F up is equal to frictional force plus W sine theta. That will work, because I'm looking for F up. So, F up is equal to what? Your frictional force plus W sine theta plus W sine theta. Sine theta, that is the weight component parallel to the inclined plane. Do I have it? Have I calculated it? Yes, I did calculate that value here. I don't have to calculate it again here. Just substitute my frictional force. Bravo. I did my calculations there. So this will give me 154, which is my frictional force, 0.42. That is my frictional force, plus my weight component parallel to the plane, 136.14. Working my magic on this one, 154.42 minus 136.14. This will be 18.28 Newton. I hope you are also calculating. It's very much important to also have your calculator handy, because I might feed you with some wrong answers. You might never know. So calculate so that you be sure with the values that we are obtaining here, and then that you understand. And then the last question says the force parallel to the plane that will move the box down. Right? We calculated up. Now we need to move the box where? Down. Question to use. I have F up, I have F down. I think F down will work for me, because I'm looking for the force to move the object where? Down. Down. Frictional force minus W sine theta. Why am I saying minus sine theta? It's because the force required to move the object down, it's not a bigger force, it's just a small force. We don't have to oppose friction that much, because it's already sliding down. That is why we are saying minus. We have our frictional force, which is 154.42 minus 136.14. Wait a minute. You see here, let us fix this answer here. Please fix that answer there. This should be 290.56. And the answer that we calculated there belongs here. Yes. I might have done that vice versa, but this answer now belongs there. So this is what we have. Whenever you are required to calculate things like this, or friction on an inclined plane, you need to understand what happens. object is moving up, what is happening on this object? Which weights are we having on this object? What am I expected to calculate? How do I go about identifying the equations there? You are able to identify the given values. You are able to identify your equation. You are able to pass. Right, this brings us to the end of today's session. I believe that you've understood how to go about calculating friction on an inclined plane. But on our next lesson now, we are still going to be on friction. But in this case, this object will not just be sliding on a horizontal surface or be sliding on an inclined plane. We'll be dealing with a push and pull factor. What happens to an object when you pull it, and what happens to an object when you push it. But let's unpack it into details on our next session. That's it for me today. Let's meet next time.